Let's pause here for just a minute and talk about that key word here in the argument, the word objective. What does that mean? That's kind of a big word. What does the term objective mean? Well, sometimes when we want to understand what a word means, we can look at the opposite of it. So as you can imagine, the opposite of objective is something that is subjective. So let's talk about actually subjective beliefs for just a moment. Because some people would say that these moral truths, these moral statements that we're making, murder is wrong, torturing somebody for fun is wrong. Some people say that those are subjective beliefs. What do they mean by that when they say they're subjective? Well, those who argue that morality is subjective say that morality is kind of like your favorite flavor of ice cream, right? We all understand that our favorite flavor of ice cream is subjective because it depends only on how you think. That's what it means to be subjective. So let's say tomorrow your favorite flavor of ice cream changes, right? If you change your mind about your favorite flavor, well then your favorite flavor changes because it's only based on how you think. There's no objectively right or wrong answer to that, what is your favorite flavor of ice cream? It depends on your subjective preferences. It's subjective and thus it's relative per person. So my favorite is chocolate, yours might be vanilla. It's relative, it's subjective. So that's what a subjective belief, that's how a subjective belief works. And some people claim that moral beliefs work that way, that they're just subjective, they're just different preferences. And so we need to argue that there's more to morality than just our subjective beliefs. We need to make a case, and that's what premise 1 is all about. We need to make a case that there are objective moral truths that are fixed independently of how we think. So in a sense, think of like mathematical truths. Those would be the classic example of objective truths that are fixed independent from how we think of them. So if moral truth is objective, then it's similar to mathematical truth in that it can't be changed even if our beliefs about them change. Similarly, if moral truths are objective, like mathematical truths, then we don't create them, we actually discover them. So that's the language you might have noticed that I've been using already this morning, is that we discover moral truth. We don't create it or construct it, we actually discover it, just like we discover mathematical truths. They exist somehow, we haven't gotten there yet, but we need to argue that these moral truths exist somehow out there apart from us, independent from how we think. So here's a really good thought experiment. This is used quite often in various areas of philosophy, but it's most helpful, I think, here in this context. This is a really good thought experiment if you're wondering if something is subjective or it's objective. So here's the thought experiment. Imagine a mad scientist. By the way, does anybody recognize who that mad scientist is? All right, my generation will recognize that back in the 80s. Good old Christopher Lloyd. So just imagine a mad scientist out there who, I don't know, put something in our drinking water or slipped something in our coffee this morning, gave us all pills. Somehow a mad scientist got us all, let's say pills, gave us all pills so that we all think something wacky is true, like gross pistachio ice cream is our favorite, right? Let's say he gave us pills so that we all think pistachio ice cream is our favorite. Well, if he did that, would that make pistachio ice cream our favorite? Yes, it would. Because our favorite flavor of ice cream is dependent on how we think, right? And if we think our favorite is pistachio, then our favorite is pistachio. It's subjective in that sense. Let's do another thought experiment. Let's say a mad scientist gave us all pills so that tomorrow morning we woke up thinking 2 + 2 = 5. Now, if we all thought that, everybody in the world thought that tomorrow, would that make 2 + 2 = 5? No, it wouldn't, because that is an objective truth that is fixed independently of how we think about it. So even if we all thought 2 + 2 = 5, it wouldn't be the case. You see the difference? So the key question becomes, what about morality? What about morality? For example, if a mad scientist gave us all pills so that tomorrow we woke up thinking that murder was morally okay, everybody in the world thought that tomorrow, would that make murder morally okay? I think we can argue, and this is part of that self-evident intuition that we have, I think we would recognize that no, murder would still be evil tomorrow, even if none of us thought it was. So that can be a helpful thought experiment to point out to somebody that there are objective moral truths that are fixed independent of how we think about them. Here's a Christian philosopher, Alvin Plantinga, probably one of the most well-known Christian philosophers over the last 50 years, has done a remarkable job arguing for Christianity in the university context, professional philosophical context. Alvin Plantinga is his name. He described objective moral truths like this. He said moral truths are objective in the sense that they're in a certain way independent of human beliefs and desires. It's wrong to torture people for the fun of it, and it would remain wrong if most or all of the world's population came to believe that this behavior is perfectly acceptable. Now, there are people who will argue against this first premise, right? There are people who still maintain that no, morality is subjective. It's all based on what you think. It's based on what you believe. It's subjective. And so I'm going to throw up some of these arguments, summary of some of these arguments, and I want to give you guys just a few minutes with each other to talk about them. How would you respond if you were in a conversation with somebody, a friendly, respectful conversation with someone who believes that morality is subjective, right? It's kind of like your favorite flavor of ice cream, and they gave you some of these reasons to think that, how would you lovingly push back? How would you lovingly push back against their argument, these arguments that morality is subjective? Take a look at these, and I'll give you just a few minutes to discuss with your neighbor there. Okay, let's go through these real quick. I overheard some of your conversations that I think you guys are on the right track. But let's just go through these real quick and walk through how we would respond if people would make these arguments with us. So we'll eliminate some confusion, right? Some of these can be a bit tricky. So let's think about the first one here. People disagree about moral issues, therefore morality is subjective. Well, it is true, right, that people disagree about all sorts of things, right? Abortion, euthanasia, those are some of the hot topics in ethics and moral issues. But there's all sorts of things. I mean, probably within your own family there's disagreements sometimes about what is right and wrong. So does this mean that morality is subjective since people disagree? Well, no, actually, this is a good point for morality being objective, right? Because if we're disagreeing about it, what does that assume? If we're disagreeing about it, we're assuming there's a right answer. We wouldn't be arguing about it if we thought it was just our personal preferences, right? I mean, nobody argues about what the right flavor of ice cream is. I mean, sometimes maybe we do just out of fun, right? But nobody takes those arguments seriously. But moral arguments, we take those seriously, right? Because we're assuming there's an objectively right answer. And we're arguing for what we think is correct. If there is moral truth, then it needs an explanation for how it can exist, where it came from, what caused it. It can't have come from us because, again, that would be subjective. Now, it doesn't seem that morality is part of the material universe, okay? So here's maybe extending the argument a little bit. If we look around in our reality and we recognize that we've discovered morality, it's pretty clear that morality isn't a physical thing, right? We can't do scientific experiments on morality. So it doesn't seem to be part of the physical material universe. It seems to point to something that exists beyond the physical material universe because it itself is immaterial. So similar to mathematical truths, they are immaterial truths, and so it points to something beyond the physical material universe as its source. That is how people utilize this argument to continue making a case for these particular attributes of the supreme being that we've been discussing. Okay? So from the first cause argument, from the design argument, we came up with these reasonable attributes of what this supreme being is like, and we can just add on to those from the moral argument now. Since morality is immaterial, it seems to be that this first cause, which exists outside the physical universe, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, if it's also the source of morality, then we can add that to the list of its attributes. It also makes reasonable sense to say that, look, if this supreme being is the source of morality, it would make sense that it is morally perfect. It seems hard to think of how morality could come from a source that's not morally perfect. So you can make a case for that, and many philosophers have, even going back to Aristotle. And then the third attribute we could add to this is that it seems reasonable that this source of morality then would be personal, because morality specifically has to do with persons, right? As we've talked about farm animals, cows, they don't have moral rights like we do, like persons. Morality seems specifically to be personal. There's a lot of impersonal things around us, right? This podium, chairs, this clicker, right? But they don't seem to participate in the moral realm like we do, right? I could destroy this and burn it and get rid of this clicker, and there wouldn't be I wouldn't be violating any moral truth, right? I wouldn't be violating any moral right or wrong. But if I did that to a person, right, that would be a whole different story. So morality seems to have to do with persons, and therefore, again, it seems reasonable to conclude that this source of morality itself is personal.